Love the masterpiece? Subscribe for more.
All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are cracking the code on a cinematic marvel that has so much more beneath the surface than you might think. We're talking about the 1942 absolute classic, Casablanca, directed by the legendary Michael Curtiz and starring that iconic duo Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. So, right out of the gate, we really have to talk about the number 3. You know, when Warner Brothers was producing this film right in the thick of World War II, they kind of just viewed it as another standard wartime picture rolling off the assembly line. But man, did it defy expectations. It went on to win 3 Academy Awards. We're talking Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and the massive one, Best Picture. And here we are, over 80 years later, and it's still universally beloved. Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly does a movie that was notoriously rushed, totally chaotic, and basically made up as they went along, I mean, the actors literally didn't even know how it was going to end, how does that turn into arguably the most quoted movie of all time? Well, to understand that, we have to look at the real-world timeline playing out right alongside the film's production. The story itself is set in the early days of World War II, but its super rushed release in 1942, that was no accident. The studio strategically timed it to capitalize on the very real-world Allied invasion of North Africa. The global headlines were completely dominated by this region, and the studio saw a golden opportunity to essentially hold a mirror up to a conflict that was unfolding in real time. Section 1. An accidental Hollywood masterpiece. There is just a staggering contrast between the studio's initial low expectations and what this film actually achieved. Think about it. On one hand, you have this rushed release and a script that's literally being written on the fly. But the final result? 3 Academy Awards, an 80-year legacy, and the most quoted script in Hollywood history. It's absolutely astonishing. Okay, so to set the stage for how this all unfolded, we need to understand the main plot mechanic driving the whole story. We're in the Vichy-controlled Moroccan city of Casablanca, right? And the absolute driving force of the narrative is these 2 incredibly valuable letters of transit. Basically, these letters are golden ticket guaranteeing safe passage to America. A famous Czech resistance leader named Viktor Laszlo and his wife Ilsa desperately need these letters to escape the Nazis so he can keep fighting. And guess what? The only person who happens to have them is our main character, Rick. Section 2. The reluctant American hero. I stick my neck out for nobody. I mean, that quote right there is Rick's entire motto, and it tells you everything you need to know about where he starts off in this film. He runs the city's hottest gambling den and nightclub, but he is this deeply cynical, hardened American expat. The woman who broke his heart in Paris, Ilsa, has just walked into his bar with her new husband. But Rick, he professes total, complete neutrality in the war. He just runs his bar. He absolutely does not take sides. Now, what's really interesting about this is that Rick isn't just a grumpy nightclub owner with a broken heart. He's actually a direct geopolitical allegory for the United States. His initial stance of bitter isolationism, it perfectly mirrors America's pre-Pearl Harbor isolationism in 1942. Rick's personal refusal to get involved is basically a microscopic view of the massive macro-geopolitical climate of the time. But as the film progresses, we watch Rick transform. He finally draws a weapon. He takes a stand. And this shift from total isolationism to active intervention serves as this incredibly potent piece of emotional propaganda. It directly mirrors America's real-life shift after the Pearl Harbor attack, basically signaling to the audience that moral neutrality in the face of absolute evil, it's just impossible. Which brings us to Section 3, a flawless, chaotic screenplay. Seriously, imagine showing up to your job and your boss hasn't even figured out the plan for the day. Writers were literally handing actors their lines mere moments before the camera started rolling. Nobody, not even the actors themselves, knew exactly how this story was going to wrap up while they were filming it. And yet, when film scholars analyze the final script today, it's widely considered to be structurally flawless. The reason it pulls that off is because of how masterfully the script balances 2 massive opposing forces. So on one hand, you've got this high-stakes political espionage involving the Third Reich, Major Strasser, and the Resistance. But on the other hand, you have this profound, deeply personal romantic tragedy. The screenplay essentially traps Rick into a seemingly impossible choice. Does he run away with the woman he loves, or does he sacrifice his own happiness for the greater good of the war effort? And the crucial point here is how the film answers that impossible choice. It totally abandons the traditional Hollywood happy ending. Instead, duty and honor triumph. Romantic love is actually sacrificed for the greater moral good of the war. And by making that tough, realistic choice, the ending becomes infinitely more resonant than if they had just tied it all up with a neat little romantic bow. Moving on to section 4, shadows, fog, and noir. Now, the cinematographer Arthur Edison, he didn't just want the movie to look cool, right? He leaned heavily into German expressionism and early film noir. He used these super sharp lights and heavy shadows to visually project the characters' internal panic onto the actual walls around them. It's all about making the visuals do the heavy lifting of telling the story. And this brilliantly illustrates the character's emotional state. You feel this constant, suffocating sense of entrapment. Notice how the shadows from the window blinds are deliberately cast to look exactly like prison bars cutting across the characters. And in that famous finale, the heavy use of fog at the airport, that's not just weather, it visually represents the hazy, completely uncertain future these characters face as they walk off into the unknown. Finally, Section 5, real refugees, real emotion. What really gives Casablanca its beating heart is something a script just cannot invent. They had an extraordinarily deep bench of character actors who were actual European refugees. We're talking about people who had fled the Nazis in real life, not just on a movie set. Casting real refugees brought this intense, completely authentic emotional gravity to the screen that acting alone simply couldn't touch. And you see this most powerfully in the iconic Duel of the Anthem scene. A group of German officers is singing, and the patrons in Rick's bar passionately drown them out by belting out the French anthem, La Marseillaise. The tears you see on the actors' faces in that scene, those are real. It's this ultimate, breathtaking synthesis of the cast's real-world trauma and the film's powerful narrative coming together in one unforgettable moment. So Casablanca is this absolute marvel of perfect timing, incredible real-world parallels, and stunning visual storytelling. But ultimately, its enduring 80-year legacy rests on a deeply human dilemma. It forces every single one of us to ask ourselves, if you were in Rick's shoes, staring into that foggy airport, would you sacrifice the love of your life for the greater moral good? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer to decode an accidental masterpiece. I hope this sparked your curiosity, and I will see you next time.